Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for coming back. Today we're going to do a little bit of I'm going to call it a therapeutic activity. We've been talking a lot about emotional incest, family enmeshment, unhealthy relational connections, and a while back, maybe about a month, we were talking about stalking and unhealthy stalking. So in today's video, I think I want to offer you a therapeutic technique that you can actually do by yourself, or you could do it with me in this video. So let's jump in. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. For all of you who are subscribed and participating, and I want to welcome all my new subscribers. Thank you so much for being here. I welcome you. And for those who are new and have not hit that subscribe button yet, first I encourage you to do that. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stick around with us. And then let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Tamara, and I'm an internationally and board certified trauma therapist, but I'm also licensed in mental health, and I specialize within my practice in treating children, teens, as well as adults and families who are dealing with trauma. Let's jump in. So, this is a topic that could last for many, many videos, guys. I mean, I've done a ton of videos, as you can see right here, on intergenerational trauma. And, the topic continues to get bigger and bigger. As a matter of fact, right now I'm working on a book with a traditional publishing company that's pretty acknowledged in the field of psychology and psychiatry and human behavior. And the book is about intergenerational trauma, so racial and family intergenerational trauma, which is coming out hopefully next year. We'll see. We're striving for that date. But in that book, I'm talking about the emotional toll and psychological as well as physiological toll that racial and family intergenerational trauma can have on a family, can have on an individual who's experiencing it. This particular intergenerational trauma for this video is going to just be family intergenerational trauma. And I'm going to give you a couple of signs that you're experiencing intergenerational trauma within your family. And then I want to give you a therapeutic technique that you can actually use to explore what's going on in your family. Now, intergenerational trauma is a pretty broad topic, you can talk about it from the angle of race. You can talk about it from the angle of families and individuals and couples. And I mean, the topic is just so robust, and yet we don't have a lot of research to support this particular topic. And a lot of psychotherapists are pretty, undertrained or not very knowledgeable about the emotional and psychological impact of intergenerational trauma. And that's the sad part, because a lot of clients and patients go to clinics to be seen for depression, anxiety, PTSD, relationship problems, and the list goes on. Obsessive compulsive disorder, personality disorders like narcissism and borderline, and avoidant personality. And for most of those conditions, there's a family history of intergenerational trauma. And unfortunately, most of these individuals don't get treated for that because a lot of psychotherapists and mental health professionals are unaware. This is a topic that, really needs to be given in a university graduate program, training program, to educate those who are unaware of it. So, it's myself and maybe a few other individuals, who are experienced in learning about and treating and spotting intergenerational trauma. That's sad, but there's only a handful of us, I think, that's pretty knowledgeable about it in terms of like psychotherapists and providers. So let's go ahead and just talk about the signs that you may be struggling with intergenerational trauma within your family. Okay? So the first sign that I think is really important for you to kind of zone in on. And what I mean by zone in on is really put your eye on this particular pattern of behavior within your family. And this is known as a content mindset. I almost forgot what I was going to say. A content mindset. Now, why do I say a content mindset? Well, intergenerational trauma basically impacts the oldest person in the family history. So, an ancestor, a great-great-grandmother, a great aunt, a great uncle, they experienced something traumatic, whether that's racial segregation or prejudice or discrimination or sexual abuse or physical abuse, whatever the case may be. They've experienced it and they didn't get proper treatment for it. And so they developed a series of behaviors and patterns of behaviors, thought patterns and emotional reactions that they used in their relationship with other people in the family. So that could be a child, a husband, a cousin, an aunt, another grandparent. And what happens is their attitudes, behaviors, emotional issues gets transferred onto the individual that's a generation beneath them. And that individual experiences the same thing and passes on that trauma. An example of this, let me give you racial trauma. And this is what I'm working on in my book right now. Racial trauma, is pretty complicated, but sometimes in a family, it starts back with an ancestor. So let's say a slave. Okay, so somebody who, was a slave in an African-American family or Hispanic family, and they never dealt with the trauma of being a slave. They had a child, right? That female had a child, and that child sat under that slave's mentality, emotions, trauma, behavioral problems, the way they saw their traumatic experience, and it got passed on to the other individual within the family. That individual took those unresolved feelings and thoughts and behaviors and passed it on to the next generation. And it gets trickled down and passed down to the next generation. And before you know it, you've got intergenerational trauma throughout the lifespan, okay? Or throughout your family's development. That's the best way I know how to put that. Let's say sexual abuse is an issue. So we'll come away from racial trauma. Let's say sexual abuse. Well, your great-great-grandmother was sexually abused, and unfortunately, she never got treated. So she sexually abused her own son, and he never got treated. So he sexually abused his daughter, and his daughter never got treatment, and she sexually abused her daughter. That is intergenerational family trauma. It's a trauma that trickles from the beginning all the way down to your particular generation. If it's not treated, it can cause a content mindset. You give up, you develop a form of learned helplessness, and you begin to feel stagnant and stuck and imprisoned in your mind, in your emotions, and you give up. And you develop a content mindset that says, you know what, there's no need in trying. There's no sense in trying to get a degree, get educated, push forward, have a wonderful life, have healthy relationships, get off these drugs and this alcohol. There's no sense in doing it. So I'm just going to be content where I am as an alcoholic, as a drug abuser, as a prostitute, as a woman in a relationship where there's domestic violence. I'm just going to be content here because this is all that is offered to me in this life. That's a content mindset, and that can get trickled down to your children, to your grandchildren, and it impacts them for generations. Okay, so a content mindset. The next is emotional sensitivity. That's another sign of intergenerational trauma. If you have generations upon generations of family members who has a really hard time in controlling their emotions, they're reactive, they're angry, they're impulsive, they're explosive, they're exaggerative, right? They're histrionic. I talk about histrionic right up here in this video if you want to go and see that after this video. But if you have a family history of individuals who are like that, it's likely going to get passed down to you, and you're going to behave that way, whether you realize it or not. Other people may say, you know what, you really are dramatic. You really are, very, very histrionic in terms of relating to me in this relationship, this work relationship, whatever. You're most likely going to behave that same way unless you get treatment and build awareness, But until then, you may begin to exhibit those same characteristics of emotional sensitivity. All right. The next is defense mechanisms. Now, defense mechanisms I talk about right up here in this video if you want to go check it out. Defense mechanisms are basically things that provides a wall, right? It covers for you so that you do not have to feel, so that you do not have to think, so that you do not have to deal with emotions, so you do not have to deal with your thoughts or judgments of other people or, criticisms. You put up this defense wall and you say, you know what, I'm not going to even worry about what you're saying to me because I don't even hear you. you, you know? There's a whole, list of defense mechanisms that I talk about, that video that I posted up here in the cards. Go ahead and check that out. But defense mechanisms is another sign of intergenerational trauma. If you have throughout the lifespan all these defense mechanisms and unhealthy ways of managing emotions, intergenerational trauma is probably at the core of that. All right. The next thing, guys, is social influence. Now, this can really go into, as my book is trying to unfold in each chapter, racial trauma. Now, social influence could be anything like, let's say your great-great-grandmother went to school and was called a racial slur every single day, was bullied, harassed, just really picked on. Let's say she never got help for that, and she shared it with her grandchildren. Now the grandchildren know that story, and they are now angry, and they are now really looking at the world in a different way. They begin to experience bullying and harassment and racial trauma, and it continues to perpetuate because, again, when you don't get help for that generation, right, sometimes those emotions and thoughts gets passed down to the next generation in an unhealthy fashion, through language, through memories, through stories being told, through behaviors. Families watch each other's behavior. A family is a system, and some family members sit back and watch other family members, and they can really begin to adopt the same mindset, the emotions and the feelings, behaviors. It's really important to understand that social influence can really turn into intergenerational trauma. Racial trauma can turn into intergenerational trauma. That's what I mean by social influence. It's trauma that has happened in the community, in the social environment, and unfortunately it never got dealt with within the family, or it never got dealt with the individual. So it got passed down through, again, behaviors and attitudes and emotions and memories to the next generation. Okay. Next thing, guys, that I want you to think about in terms of intergenerational trauma is psychological imprisonment. Now, this is something that can happen whether it's racial or family trauma, or racial, family, intergenerational trauma. It's a stage in your mind where you begin to feel as if you have no way out, right? You're starting to feel trapped. You're starting to feel overwhelmed. You're starting to feel like there's no way to get out of something, nowhere to go. Psychological imprisonment can get passed down to your children. I don't know how to get out of this relationship with domestic violence, so I'm just going to stay here, right? That content mindset. If children are underneath that, the next, generation is going to feel the same exact way within their own relationships. An example of this may be marriage, for example. There are some people who feel like, what's the point in getting married? It's a piece of paper. It's a date. I don't want a big shebang. Let's just not get married. But there's a level of commitment, a level of respect, a level of moral class, morality, whatever you want to call it, that goes along with that ring and that piece of paper. It really cements the two of you together. There's something very, very wonderful about a marriage, right? Where two people have completely committed to each other. If a child hears their parents say, what's the point in getting married? It's a piece of paper, it's a ring, we don't need to do it. The child may begin to take that same mindset and that same disposition into their adulthood and say the same exact thing. What's likely to happen, and I've seen this in a lot of my cases in the past, is that child is going to take that same mindset into their adulthood, and they're not going to commit to the relationship. So now they're going to experience infidelity. They're going to experience deception. They're probably going to get into a relationship that's not healthy, and they're going to stay. And they're probably going to get into a relationship where there's domestic violence or unhealthy interactions. Not everyone can stay committed without a ring and a piece of paper. So the child is really being set up for a shaky and negative future because of the mindset that they have adopted because of someone else in their family. That may be really, really hard to wrap your mind around and understand because this doesn't happen in a lot of cases. But it does happen. So, I think it's important to keep that in mind because that kind of intergenerational trauma can really lead that younger generation to be stuck, to feel stuck. and not make a move in a healthy way. And last but not least is lack of commitment. Now, I think if you're seeing lack of commitment through many generations within your family, that's intergenerational trauma. Something happened at the very beginning of your family line, and somehow it got passed down through generations, and now, yourself or maybe your child has adopted a lack of commitment mindset, and a lack of commitment can be, the result of a family member being in prison for many years, a family member being severely mentally ill and not being able to function, a family member being disabled psychologically and not being able to function, racial trauma that has really traumatized an individual and given them racialized PTSD, which is something I'm talking about in my book as well. So, a lack of commitment could show up in your family line for a variety of things and in a variety of ways. But, I think it's important to keep in mind, just because there's a lack of commitment doesn't mean there's intergenerational trauma, but there's a possibility that it could. I hope this is helpful to you. Thank you so much for being with me today, guys. In this video, I encourage you to give it a thumbs up and go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stick around with us and get more videos. Hit that bell button as well so you know when I publish new videos. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.